Okay, so we're going to continue with trig. We've talked about SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so if we have a figure, remember we have to have a right triangle somewhere. And if you are looking for, let's say, this angle, you get to figure out what trig function you are going to have to use based on the information that you have. So whatever angle I either have or an angle that I'm looking for, that's where I'm putting my little person that I've talked about. So I know that I'm looking for or using this angle, and from where I'm at, I have the opposite and I have the adjacent. So what trig function has the opposite and the adjacent? It's going to have to be tangent. So it's tangent has the opposite and the adjacent. So I'm looking for the tangent of this angle is going to equal the opposite over the adjacent. Put that in my calculator. Let me grab one that you guys are familiar with. So because I'm looking for the angle, I'm going to use the inverse tangent, 77 divided by 75, and hit enter. So that gives me about 45.8. So x equals about 45.8 degrees. Let's do another one. So let's say I have the angle here of 23 degrees and this is 15, and I'm looking for that, which would be my hypotenuse. So again, this is either the angle that I have or the angle that I'm looking for, so I'm going to put my little person there. In relation to the angle that I'm standing at, 15 is the opposite, and x is always going to be the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle. So I know that that is the hypotenuse. So what trig function incorporates the opposite and the hypotenuse? It's going to be the sine. So the sine of the angle that I have or I'm looking for equals the opposite, which is 15 over x. This is where I need to get the x up in the numerator, so you can think of this as two different ways. You can think of this as either just switching places. I'm going to go ahead and write this over here as well, because I'm going to do it two different ways. You pick whichever way makes the most sense to you. Going back to proportions, I know that one of the properties of proportions, I can just simply switch places with those and have x equals 15 all over the sine of 23. If you still can't wrap your head around why that actually works, what we can do is we can multiply both sides by x. So I have x sine of 23 equals 15, because those are going to cancel out. Now I can divide both sides by the sine of 23, and those cancel out, so I'm left with x equals 15 divided by the sine of 23. So whichever one makes the most sense to you. Grab my calculator, and I have 15 divided by the sine of 23. I am going to close my brackets, my parentheses, and I get x to equal about 38.4, and then it would be a lineal measurement since it's a side. Okay, do one more of those. So let's say I have 48 degrees here, and I know that this is 24 feet, and I'm looking for that measurement. Okay, so I clearly have the hypotenuse, so I'm looking for a leg. So again, this is the angle that I either have or the angle that I'm trying to find. So there's my little person. So from where I am standing, I have the hypotenuse clearly, because that is always going to be the hypotenuse since it's opposite the right angle. And then I have the adjacent. So I have the opposite, or excuse me, I have the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So going back up to SOHCAHTOA, it's going to have to be cosine. So the cosine of whatever angle I have equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And again, I could do it two ways. Again, I'm just going to use the property of proportions, and I know that I can simply just bring this baby up here. So that gives me 24 cosine of 48 equals x. I guess to clarify, I could have multiplied both sides by 24, So in my calculator, I'm going to type in exactly like I read it on this calculator, 24 cosine of 48, and hit enter, and get about 16 point, let's see, we're dealing with the side, so I'll say 16.1, and I think this was feet. Okay, so that's what you're going to be doing for those types of problems.